Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic video. Coming live at you from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Monday at 9:22. Hope everyone had a great weekend. I had a really awesome weekend. Had a real fun gig with a jazz group that I play in. Me and my friend Mike Whitehead, one of my great comrades. Mike Whitehead plays bass in my band Quantum, and we've had a super long relationship for a long time. He was one of the first musicians I met in Maine when I came here. I was I was in school. I was going to school in Boston when I first met him. So I was in my early 20s when I first met him. So I've known him for like over 20 years. It's pretty crazy. And when I my folks moved up here when I was in college, when I graduated high school, and then I was going to school in Boston. I would come up to visit them, and I didn't know anybody up here. I had one friend that I had met, and his name was Damien. We had we kind of hit it off. We had a lot of interest in some of the same music and things, and so he was living in Maine. He was from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he was living in Maine, and he moved back quite a few years ago. He moved back to New Mexico, and we've lost touch, unfortunately, but that was many years ago. But we had a lot of the same interest in music, and he was living in the area, and we had met somewhere, and he had told me about this open mic, or essentially it was like a jazz jam, and he had told me about this open mic that was going on, and it was at this place in Belfast called Bell the Cat. And it's still Bell the Cat is still a thing. It's moved to three different locations. It's now in its third incarnation. The business was sold, I think, about 8 years ago to a new owner, and someone else owns it, and they moved it. It's moved to a third location, but it's still in Belfast. But the first owners of Bell the Cat really had something uniquely special because it was a coffee shop, and they had sandwiches and food, but they had this really awesome location right in downtown Belfast, and it was a pretty big place, beautiful spot. But they used to have a jazz jam in there, and my friend Damien had told me about it, and he knew I was in music school, and that I didn't know anybody in the area, so he had told me about it. So we met there. We it was like on Tuesday nights, and we started going to it. And when I would come back from school, and I'd be on break or whatnot during the holidays or whatever it was, and I'd be home for a while, we would go to it. And that's where I met Mike, and I met a lot of great friends that I still have really great relationships with to this day, and that I play really fortunate enough to play music with them. And I look up to a lot of those guys, Glenn Dubois, Jeff Densmore, and especially Mike Whitehead. I look up to them as mentors even to this day. And so Mike and I've had a long, long history together, and he plays bass in Quantum, my band. And aside from that band, we've had a lot of different projects that we have played in, and that we still play in now. We also play in a band called Electric Bonfire now, which is more of a rock band. He plays bass in Quantum and also in Electric Bonfire. He's primarily a jazz trumpet player, just an amazing jazz musician. He's played, he had or does have such a history with jazz and also with music in general. One of the big things that he was doing when I first met him, he was playing with Marianne Driscoll, who is a really well respected kind of avant-garde jazz piano player, and he was playing with her a lot. And they had even they used to play all around Maine, but they even went to Europe and toured. She was really well known at one point in New York City as a real, kind of mover and shaker in the avant-garde. She collaborated with people like Cecil Taylor, a lot of big names. But he played with her for a long time, and it was, just an amazing period when I first met him because, I was really inexperienced, and they kind of took me under their wing. They had a lot of patience with me, and fast forward many many years, we're still playing together. So we about 4 years ago, aside from Quantum, Mike had put together this jazz group, and we've had about two or three incarnations of the band. And our more recent, which is about 4 years old, the band is about, yeah, I'd say about 4 years now, the Whitehead Dean group. And we are, kind of, I guess it's kind of a modern jazz group. It's similar to like the later Miles Davis stuff when Miles started going full on electric, like around the time period of when he started putting out albums like on the corner and the Silent Way, the more electrified Miles side, like the mid to late '60s. And I think that the Whitehead Dean group kind of has a little bit more of that sound. The other groups that we've had, the incarnations of that band, we had one incarnation many years ago, which was a trio with Mike, myself, and this really great bass player who used to live around here, Doug Dietrich. And we were it was more of like a free jazz kind of a thing. We did do some standards, but it was mostly free jazz. And it was just a trio. And then years later, Mike started another jazz group that was called the Mike Whitehead Group, and that was with Tom Luther, just an amazing piano player and friend, and with Spike Hassan, an amazing bass player. And that was a combination of things. Like we did a lot of tunes. We started doing that group was quite a bit different because we did a lot of Mike's original tunes. Very much, in the jazz kind of world, but it was very much centered on Mike's tunes. And then this newer incarnation is more electrified. It's got, guitar and bass. Mitch Markowitz, who plays guitar also in Electric Bonfire, plays guitar in this band. Glenn Dubois plays bass. And we still do some original tunes, but we do some standards, but we also do lots of improv. But it's got a lot more of like a '60s kind of vibe. It's got, because it's more guitar driven, it's got a little bit more at times of a rock kind of vibe to it, but it's a little bit more of a loose. I don't know. It's kind of a loose, organic kind of a thing too with the band. We have a very loose. It's got a little bit of a traditional jazz thing, but it's got a real '60s kind of vibe to it. So it's very different, I think, than the other incarnations. But that group is I don't know, it's a lot of fun, and it's a big challenge because I don't really get a chance to play that kind of style as much, and especially this kind of brand of jazz. So it's always a lot of fun, and there's always like an element where we're kind of by the seat of our pants. It's got this edge to it. So we have to, stay on our toes a lot because we don't really know what's coming next. And there's a set list, but things change a lot in the band, and the arrangements change, and there's a lot of space for the songs and the tunes to kind of go in these strange and unusual directions. So, and it's like I said, it's got more of a '60s vibe, and then it also has a real modern kind of a vibe to it also. But that group was primarily a band that played at Lulu's and Fog has unfortunately been closed, which was we had a really cool residency there for a few years, along with my band Quantum, and then they closed for because of the pandemic, and then we didn't play for about a couple of years, and then this past summer we started playing again, and we'll see about maybe doing that again this year because that would be really fun because it was a real great time to do a real great experience to bring that band back. And we were playing all of these outdoor gigs at Lulu's, which is the side business of Fog, and it was all outdoor performances. And we did that all last summer with the jazz group, the Whitehead Dean group, and also with Quantum. And we just played our first gig in quite a long time since the summer. We just played our first gig this past weekend, and it was a blast. I think it will take us a while to kind of get our bearings again because it's been so long. But I really enjoy that group. And then I went to a bunch of there's so many music events going on this weekend, so I went to that. Went to a couple of events, and it was very cool. But yesterday I did a big show on the John Wick franchise. And I did that again when I do these shows. I don't really it's pretty off the cuff. I don't really plan on the shows until like I'm in the moment and I'm thinking of something that I want to talk about because there's again part of the reason I do it that way and I don't like usually back when I first started doing videos for Film Fanatic, I was just doing videos for um, my Facebook page. I was just doing these live videos, and that was a little bit more well planned, or it was definitely more of a planned thing because I would typically, if I was going to do a show, I would make like a formal post promoting it, and then for a lot of those shows, I would actually do kind of a lot of research. I would have a get out a pen and paper, and whatever movie I was gonna do, I would plan it out. Say 3 to 5 days in advance, sometimes a week, and I would do like take all these notes and do all this research, and then I would do the show with those notes, and I would try to keep it real formal. And that's how the structure of those shows were back when I was doing the Facebook Live thing. And I would only do the videos about twice a month or so. I would break them up. I wouldn't do it. Now I do them every day, but I had it pretty formally structured that way. But, since then, I've switched to just doing YouTube for video content because I like the quality a lot more. I think the quality, from on with doing all of the videos on Facebook, it was really great, and I learned a lot, and I continually learn about this whole thing the more videos I do. But I just felt like the quality of the audio and the video was not really that great. I didn't have if something went wrong, didn't really have the chance to fix those problems, and I ran into a bunch of technical things that were causing a lot of interruptions with the videos. And then I started doing these YouTube videos and then I put up this YouTube channel like late summer of last year. And then I got in the habit of just doing the videos, and then I found myself really, craving to do more and more videos. And then this past year, I started buying more movies, and I found myself kind of inundated with the amount of things that I wanted to talk about. So I decided to kind of change up that whole way of doing videos and the whole format. And because there's so many movies I love and so many things that I'm inspired by, I decided to, keep it a little bit more loose, not have it as planned. So I usually, when I decide on doing a video, it's usually in the moment, and I try to keep things fresh and kind of off the cuff a little bit. So yesterday, I well, Saturday, actually Saturday, I talked to some friends about going to see the new John Wick movie, John Wick Chapter 4, the fourth movie in the franchise. And at first, when I heard about, I knew this movie was coming out for a while. I try to go into movies really, really cold for the most part because I find it's just more exciting that way. Obviously, it's nice to know something about a film, or if there's at least a little bit of buzz or excitement around a film. But generally, I try to stay away. And I've found over the years, since, or I should say, since I've kind of switched that up too, as far as like, there was a time when I would go to a movie and I would read a bunch of reviews, listen to a lot of people, various people talk about the film, see all the trailers, all those kinds of things. And then at that point is usually that would be usually the point that I or the time that I would decide to see the movie or not. But I don't know. I feel like trailers, for the most part, are do a really provide a real disservice for films now. I find now, and I think it's because of a marketing thing. I think it might be some weird method or some way of a way of thinking that the studios think that by showing as much as they can in particular trailers, it's going to grab more people. I don't know what it is, because it's obviously it's a little bit it's a challenge to get people to go to the theater. So I don't know if I think sometimes I think, well, maybe these companies are doing this by showing these trailers that basically show the entire movie. Maybe it's some kind of weird way of them thinking that they can draw more people in, which doesn't make any sense because most trailers now are reveal everything, and they don't. When you see a good trailer, it should really pique your curiosity, and it should draw you in, and you should not you shouldn't get any answers when you watch a trailer. It should be just enough info to entice you, to make you excited, and then that's it. But now trailers basically go into like big heavy, the heavy duty plot reveals, the beginning and the middle, and even the conclusive ending to films. They seem to basically show and lay out on the table, and it's a bad state of affairs. So I typically try to stay away from trailers, and trailers now I find are also much longer, which is part of the problem. I've seen some trailers for movies of where they're almost 5 to 7 minutes long, and they basically tell you the entire movie. So there's no it just reveals all of the potential magic that the movie has, or any of the potential surprises or plot twists. So I typically try to stay away from trailers now. But when like again, I said I do like the John Wick franchise. I really love the first one. I think it's one of the best action movies, you know, in history, and I think it's one of the best movies of Keanu Reeves' long career. The other group of movies I do like quite a bit, but I've always felt the franchise as a whole is pretty mixed. I thought, like, again, I think I did a big show because the reason I did a big show on the John Wick franchise yesterday was because I got really excited, and I was going to go, and I went last night to see John Wick 4, Chapter 4. So I decided during the day, again, unplanned, yesterday morning to do a show just on that franchise, with the focus being mainly on the first one. And like again, like I said, I love the first one. I think it's a it's an amazing action movie. I think it's such a great universe. And the second one was good too. I thought the second one was really, really good in a lot of ways. So hard so hard to top, I think, with what they did with the first one. Not as good, but I thought it was pretty solid. The third one I felt was a little bit overblown. I thought it was a little bit too much of. It felt like it was more of a. I felt like they turned John Wick's character into a little bit. They kind of made him more of a superhero character, where he seemed to be invulnerable to pain, and you didn't really like nothing seemed to be able to stop him, and he kind of had these qualities that felt like he was superhuman. And I know like the whole John Wick universe is it's kind of based on a graphic novel kind of concept, and so everything is like a heightened alternate universe. So everything is heightened. But the thing that I loved so much about the first one is that it had that, and it was a beautiful cinematic experience, and it was a heightened reality that they were going for. But there is still this real primal thing, and that John Wick's character is essentially human, a human being, and he was still vulnerable. There was an element of danger, and there was a real grittiness that came along with that, and the stakes felt really high. And it felt like by the time the third one came out, it had some really great things around it. There was, some beautiful set pieces. The design was really wonderful. Some really great fight sequences, but it just felt like I felt that gritty realism that the first one really had as such a key component of it in this heightened reality. That gritty realism felt like it was had kind of fallen by the wayside. It suddenly felt like there wasn't the stakes weren't as high, and that John Wick's character was kind of impervious to whatever was being thrown at him. So it lost a little bit of that grit for me, at least. I still, still thought it was a good movie, but as a whole, I felt the franchise not not really consistent. Franchises for me are a pretty mixed bag. There are those exceptions, and I've talked about those before. And I've done lots of coverage, lots of videos on different franchises. Friday the 13th, I did one on the Avenger franchise, the Marvel franchise. I've done one on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, the Halloween, and it's a pretty mixed bag. A few of those franchises, in particular, the Friday 13th one is definitely my favorite one overall. And one show or shows that I do want to get to, which is really close behind, if not tied with Friday 13th, is the Purge franchise. I think that is a killer franchise, and I think it's in a rare place because I actually feel that each movie in that franchise gets better, and which I think is pretty exceptional because Friday 13th, and I know it's a very different kind of a genre. I feel like, well, Friday 13th, that's a slasher franchise. But I feel like with that, the thing about that franchise is it gives you something new, but it's pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent. It gives you just enough, but it's just overall, it has a very consistent cohesiveness to each film. And it gives you just enough new material and new things that keep you engaged, and there is variety in it, and it does deliver the goods for the most part for what you for as a fan or a viewer of the slasher genre. It to me it satisfies those needs. And I with that franchise, there's obviously there's films in that are my favorite. But I think the Purge franchise is really unique because every film, even to like the last one that came out, the first Purge, which came out, I think, maybe 2 years ago now or a year ago. I almost think that's the best one, and that came out, like again, like I said, like about a year or two ago. But that franchise, I feel, is in a special place because I think every movie does get better, and that is definitely a show I need to put put out and I also need to buy all of those movies. I actually only own the first Purge movie. I have the first one with Ethan Hawke on Blu-ray, which I really think I love that movie to death. But there's a bunch of other ones. I need to get all of them. But that will be a future franchise at some point I'll do. So when I had heard, quite a while ago that there was going to be a fourth installment of John Wick. I was like, okay. After the third one, I was a little bit kind of tired or fatigued of the franchise. I wasn't really excited when I first heard about it. I thought, okay, this would be, I when I heard the news that Donnie Yen was going to be in it, I thought that would be cool. Like that sounds pretty awesome. Donnie Yen is one of the iconic martial arts action stars. He's right up there with like Jackie Chan and Jet Li, and he's been around for years. He's in so many great martial arts movies, action movies. He's an icon. And so I was excited that he was going to be introduced as a new character in this. And I thought, well, maybe this movie will have even more of a like a Hong Kong martial arts kind of vibe, because they all obviously do already. But I thought maybe this will go even more in that direction. So I was excited with that prospect. But generally, I wasn't like hell bent with. I wasn't hell. I didn't have this feeling where I was like hell bent on like, okay, I got to go see this. I wasn't super excited. And then just last week, I saw there's a couple of guys. There's like a handful of people I watch pretty regularly on YouTube, and I, for the most part, trust their opinions. And I find that we really agree on a lot of things. And I usually there's two guys that I watch generally that usually review their specialty are like newer films, horror films, action films, and what have you. And so I checked out a little bit of what they had to say. They had seen the films early, and they basically said they raved about it. They said that this one was John Wick 4 was just as good as the first one, if not the best one in the franchise. And they basically said that this film was something to really see on the big screen. Like this was really like a cinematic experience. And the other thing that I had heard about this movie was that it was really conclusive, and that it was going to be like the final installment, and there was a real conclusion, and it wasn't going to be left to, there wasn't going to be the sense of openness that there could be another one and then another one. So that intrigued me. And suddenly I found myself super excited. So I went last night to go see John Wick 4, John Wick Chapter 4 at Flagship Cinema. And I have to say, my first impression of the film, and now that it's been 24 hours, and like I've said before, I typically like, if I see a movie in the theater, I like to, process it, let it sink in, resonate, if you want to call it that, for a period of time, because, your opinion can change a lot, after, maybe a couple hours, or even like say a couple of days go by. Your first thing will your sometimes your I find too, sometimes your first impression of things can be off. But generally for me, I try to, like, if I listen to a band for the first time, if I discover a band for the first time, or if I, you know, come across a book or a movie or whatever it is, generally I feel like if that piece of art resonates with me right away and I find myself lost in it and where I'm engaged, like in the moment or in that time, usually not about 99% of the time, that's something that I find that I am falling in love with or that I love, and that it's an experience, and I then become a fan of that particular thing. There are, there's exceptions. There's things of where, there's films or books or bands where you first hear them and you're like, it's pretty good, or you kind of, you hear it in passing, and then, that's happened to me a lot with films. Like one example, I did a show. One of my all-time favorite movies is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. One of the most iconic horror films ever. I did a big show on that. I did a cover. I did a series of where I covered a few of the films in the franchise. The franchise itself is kind of a mess, but I love the first one to death. That's one of my all-time favorites. I love the second one quite a bit. But I did a show where I did a video on the remake, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. And that's an example of that. I had a really weird first impression of that movie, and also a pretty strange kind of relationship to that movie. When I first saw that movie, I don't know, I don't even think I really finished it. I wasn't really into it. I don't know what it was. I don't know, I just had this weird impression and I just felt like I wasn't invested in it. And a bunch of time went by and I saw it again and I was like, okay, it's pretty good. It's better than I thought. It's not great, but it's pretty good. And and then a few years went by and then I bought it. A real cheap version of it on DVD. I figure, what the hell? I'll watch this again. It's been a while. I'll give it another chance. And then I watched it and I was just like blown away by it. And I love that movie now. And now to me that's one of my favorite remakes and it's such a great movie and I did a show on it. So and now I just love that movie and I almost had this impression where I like was kicking myself as to why didn't I like this movie in the beginning? Really weird. So sometimes you have that impression. That's happened to me with certain bands that I really love. Where at first I was like, yeah, it's pretty good, or even vice versa, where your first impression is like, I kind of dig this. This is cool. But then it starts, maybe your enthusiasm kind of dissipates, and you find yourself, I don't know, and that's happened a few times with me with a couple of groups. But generally, I'd say it's pretty safe to say like your kind of first impression is kind of where it's at. And I have to say, John Wick Chapter 4 is easily one of the greatest action movies ever. I was blown away by it. I remember I went with a couple of friends and we were talking about it a little bit, without being annoying to each other. And I remember turning to a couple of my friends and being like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. And after the film, we stayed through the credits, and we talked about the film. And then we continued to talk about the film as we were walking out of the theater. And we had this whole big discussion about it. And I found myself totally enjoying this movie. I had heard before seeing this movie that it was long and that it was close to 3 hours, and it didn't drag at all. We had Before we went to the movies, we went out for Chinese food, and we had a big meal, and I thought, okay, maybe we shouldn't have eaten a big meal before seeing a 3 hour movie because especially Chinese food, you're all bloated and loaded with MSG. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm gonna get super sleepy, but I didn't at all. I was totally into this movie, and some of the action sequences were simply breathtaking. And the thing that I was blown away by, it introduced these new characters that I thought were just terrific. But the action sequences, I felt like each time there were these action sequences that were shown on the screen or in this movie, everything just continually was getting more and more elevated. Like they it was always different. They were always, and I felt it was a thing of where they were topping themselves. But it wasn't like, sometimes with action movies, particularly American action movies, like newer ones, they can be, I feel like they can be really over bloated or overstuffed, and there can be too much, and it can be this mentality of like everything, you know like this kitchen sink mentality, just everything, every tool at their disposal they'll throw on the big screen. And there's times where that happens where, and it can take you out of the movie because it's too much and it's not really, you can't get your bearings when you're watching the film. And this movie has just some of the highest abundance of creativity I've ever seen. And yet it felt like everything was still grounded. There was the stakes, it felt like this reminded me a lot of the first one because it felt like there was an element of danger, and it felt like there was a lot of tension, and the stakes are really, really high. And even though the action is really over the top, it just felt like, and again, it's set in a heightened universe. It felt like the stakes were high, and there was an element of danger, and it just had this grittiness to it, like the first one. And it had a very organic quality to it, like the first one. And just when you think you've seen it all, they introduce another sequence, and it's even more intense and even more of a spectacle. And it was breathtaking. I was blown away by it. I think it's definitely my first impression of the movie. And now that I've sat, it's been in my brain now for 24 hours. I think it's just as good as the first one. It blows away the rest of the other films like completely. And I'd almost go as far as to say that this might be the best one in the entire franchise. And I think one of the things too, one of my friends had said that you could see this film without, it's truly a standalone film, that which I think is really one of the strengths of this movie. It's truly a standalone film because I think you could go into this and go to see this movie without having to have seen any of the films in the franchise. I think it's that strong, and I think the characters are that strong. The story, and I feel, like the story for John Wick is pretty straightforward. But I feel the writing for this story is actually really good. I think the characterizations, the stakes are higher, and I think the writing for this and the story itself is better than the rest of the movies. I think it's got a little bit more depth to it. But overall, I have to say I feel like they knocked it out of the park. Visually, it's there's some sequences in this film that I've never seen ever before. I mean, breathtaking. And again, they introduce new characters, and there's always a danger when, particularly around a franchise, it happens a lot of where a lot of times they'll try to introduce more and more characters on the screen, and then, maybe it becomes this thing of where they, the characterizations, the writing isn't as good, so you start getting, bogged down as a viewer, and it takes you out of the movie. With this movie, I feel like it was handled with a lot of love and care. That to me, that doesn't happen. I found myself really caring about all of these new characters that were being introduced, and I, was in it to win it. I was really wanting to see where the story went. And it was directed by Chad Stahelski, who directed the first one, and I believe he directed all of the movies in the franchise. Um, the cast, like I said, the cast is really incredible. Obviously, Keanu Reeves, he's amazing in this. He really is. Donnie Yen's character is just so awesome in this movie. One of the best moves I think for the studios to put him in this film. His character itself is great, and his sequences, the fight sequences that he is involved in are just amazing, incredible. Scott Adkins, Bill Skarsgård is unbelievable in this movie. He's like the head villain basically, and his character is so incredibly sinister and evil. I mean, just breathtaking. Ian McShane is so great. The late Rance Reddick, who died just a few days before this movie was released. Hiroki Samada, Lawrence Fishburne, just tremendous, just tremendous. The music for this film, that's one of the things I loved about the first John Wick, is I felt like the music was so integral to the film. Really cool, like cutting edge electronic music, electro music. This film really has an amazing soundtrack. The music just bumps, and the cinematography is just breathtaking. And again, like I said, it's like there are sequences in this film that are unlike anything I've ever seen, and I think it's really highly inventive. And I think it was handled with a certain delicacy because, and a delicate hand, because it could have crossed that line of where it was too much or overwhelming. Because literally, if you want to see people die with axes or people die during a car chase scene, motorcycle scene, hand to hand combat, gunplay, this movie delivers across the board with all of those methods of how people can get killed. But it's handled so well, and there's so much detail, and it's easily one of the best action movies that I've seen. Definitely the best movie I've seen this year, and I think it's my when I looked up the first two reviews that I saw of this film, one of the guys had said that he felt that this was like an action masterpiece, and I kind of have to say that too. I kind of feel like this was a masterpiece. Not only do I feel it was the best movie of 2023 that I've seen of the new year by far, just as a good movie, but especially as an action movie. I think it's one of the greatest action movies I've ever seen. It's a perfect combination of, it has the John Wick movies and the whole kind of mythology with it. It pulls from a lot of resources, and this movie really pulls even more from various genres. You know, I feel like it's got the obvious kind of like graphic novel vibe. It has a western, pulls from like the American western genre. And especially this one, it really pays homage to the classic Hong Kong action movies, martial arts movies. It has a very modern kind of almost film noir vibe to it. And I have to say too, seeing the film on the big screen, the production value is bananas. Like it's really intense. And I'd see it again. I didn't think, you know, considering that this movie is close to 3 hours, it didn't drag at all. I just found myself getting more and more into the film. And again, it's a great balance of where there's lots of stuff going on the big screen, lots of, you know, over the top violence, but there's great downtime. There's a great ebb and flow. There's a lot of great dialogue. There's a lot of you know, kind of exploration as to, you know, what the story is about, and it's a great balance. And I totally recommend this movie. Especially, this is definitely a movie to see in the big screen, on the big screen. Like, I mean, it's a, to me, it is the reason you go to the movies, to experience that, you know, that ritualistic time of, you know, being in a dark room with your friends or by yourself or in a room with strangers, and you want pure escapism for a couple hours or a few hours. This is that experience. So I can't recommend this movie enough. I just think it's yeah, easily the best movie I've seen in 2023, and I'd say one of the best action movies I've seen in recent memory, possibly of all time. And I go as far as saying that it's just as good as the first John Wick movie. It blows away the other two completely. And I go even a notch above that and say that this might be the best movie in the entire franchise. And the other thing that's so great about it, like I said before, is this movie really is a standalone movie. I think you could see this. It gives enough of a backstory, especially in the beginning, of where this whole thing is kind of coming from. And I really think it's so well done that way that you could see this movie without you know, not seeing any of the other films in the franchise. And that's a real strength. I think that really elevates, you know, particularly if it's a movie that's so well done, of where it's truly a standalone film, that you could see it cold and you'll get all the info that you need. And this is an example of that. So, tremendous movie. I was super blown away. Definitely, I would go see this again if you get a chance to see this in a movie, in the movies. Uh, Definitely go see it. It's awesome. And the other thing that I love is that it's really conclusive, and you know that, okay, this is how things are going to end. It's a it's a great conclusion, and it's a very satisfying conclusion. So yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. Just one kick-ass movie. So this is Jason Dean, Film Fanatic. So thanks again for the support, and we will see you next time. Peace.